September the 19th, 2021. I'm Dana Durnford, the nuclear proctologist.org. I hope everybody's doing good on this Sunday night. You can call in 709-589-4406, 709-589-4406. Japan says they got 1,000 tanks. We counted them. There's 750, 150. Those are the small ones. So there's not even 750, let alone 1,000. TEPCO failed to deliver on a promise to install a fence to restrict the contamination to the Pacific Ocean. TEPCO admits the ice wall won't stop the groundwater from entering the reactors and the nuclear meltdowns. And TEPCO says the groundwater bypass operation are not having an effect, and that TEPCO is unable to bring the contaminated water issues under control, and that they're burning radioactivity all over Japan. They're taking it, grinding it up in Fukushima, including a nuclear meltdown, taking it to other prefectures, communities, cities, and burning it in the incinerators. That's terrorism, and they need to stop it. Not tomorrow, but right now. It's outrageous. We're going to cover this story tomorrow night exclusively. Lethal radiation levels detected in Fukushima nuke plant reactor lid. First off, Unit 2 completely liquefied. They've never seen that in history. Third off, this thing burnt for days and days. Some of it's gone China syndrome. A lot of it came out the side of the building. And then when you see Western Tokyo with 36 million people, metropolitan Tokyo, may have been contaminated, murdered, when the radioactive plume fell to the ground after number 2 core was exposed. You're not getting near the lid if the core is exposed. You're getting within a football field of it, but then you're dying that week. TEPCO says increased radioactive releases from workers going in and out of reactor 2. TEPCO is not a decommission authority. Many, including Fukushima Prefecture government, had called many times for them to be taken out of positions of authority. And TEPCO, by the way, went bankrupt right away. They were nationalized by the government. But you can't go in and out of a building with nuclear meltdowns. And so the media that reported on that should have their degrees taken away from them and be locked up for the rest of their life. Potential global catastrophe from Fukushima Reactor 2 fuel. Reactor could be destroyed, making Tokyo area uninhabitable, which is exactly what happened. And this filthy, despicable, hateful, disgusting industry took great pleasure in hoodwinking you and tricking you and deceiving you and murdering all the species on the planet. New TEPCO data unequivocally shows ongoing criticalities at Unit 2. You ain't getting near it. No, neither is robots. And container number 2 reactor no longer sealed. French Nuclear Safety Authority. New data unequivocally shows the criticality at Unit 2. Radioactivity 10 million times usual levels, number 2. Workers evacuated. First off, there's no workers at Unit 2, period. And March 27, 2011, there was at best 20 or 30 people on site. They weren't working on Unit 2 or Unit 3 because these detonated. This was the very beginning of this meltdown. You've done nothing there. Yeah, workers were evacuated because the earth split in 6 places that we know about, and the radioactive steam coming out of the ground was lethal doses. over 10 sieverts an hour, but that's what the Geiger counter is maxed out at. Each reactor holds 3,450 spent fuel assemblies. Each one of them is almost a ton. 1,800 pounds, basically. And so they're claiming there's only 900 tons at all the reactors combined, so they don't have to explain where the fuel is to. This industry has no right to exist. The industry is supposed to be exterminated long before they exterminate all the species. 3,450 assemblies. Each reactor top of the pool, at the top of the buildings, hold 3,450 assemblies. I'll do the math for you right quick. I'll bring it up for you. 3,450 assemblies. 100 fuel rods, 18 pounds each, is 1,800 pounds per assembly. Is 6,200,000 pounds. 6,200,000 at the top of each building. And a common spent fuel pool holds 6,291 fuel rod assemblies. Now, there's no repository at these buildings, so those assemblies are stacked, or those fuel pools are stuffed with fuel rods because there is no repository to put the fuel rods in. So the fuel pools were at the top of the buildings. As you can see, it actually doesn't exist, right? So let's say 4 buildings are 18 million pounds. Or for 32 million pounds. Counting the reactor cores, basically, is minimum. It's probably double that. Decades of reactor cores. This is so important. I don't understand why the world is sitting in silence and not challenging these despicable cowards. I just don't get it. Damage at Unit 2 is what prompted TEPCO to discuss evacuating the workers, perhaps because the reactor burned continuously for several days. Even the NRC admitted it. Okay, but we're going to cover that story tomorrow night, not tonight. Because there's a lot to cover on Unit 2. And it's important. Japan's plan to discharge nuclear waste into the Pacific worries the island nations. Water storage nightmare. Bolts in the Fukushima tanks will corrode in just a few years. And the TEPCO says it doesn't know how long the tanks will hold because there's nothing in the tanks. You can't fill up the tanks and get back on the site is the problem. So if you fill up the tank, you're talking about 1.4 million sieverts per tank. Of just beta, by the way, not alpha, neutrons, and gamma. Japan's plan to discharge the defective memories of U.S. nuclear testing endures in the Pacific, and it's a level up from urgent for them. At the Bikini Atoll, Christmas Island, Maralinga. Pacific nations and territories aren't yet convinced their people and waters will be safe when Japan discharges, the nuclear industry discharges, again they're calling it process. This is not, the REVA system can't filter it. Let's take a step back for a second. And so the tanks are confusing for people, right? In 2021, they claimed they had 1,100 tanks. or 1,000 tanks. If you go back to 2014, they had 1,000 tanks. Wait, sorry, I smurfed it up. 2013, they had 1,000 tanks. Oh, and they pretended the top of the reactor buildings looked like that when it didn't in 2013. In 2014, 1,000 tanks. 2017, 900 tanks. I missed something there. 2013 was 1,000 tanks. 2014 was 1,200 tanks. There you go. 2017 was 900 tanks. So 1,000 2013, 1,200 2014, 900 in 2017. And go try to walk like that. That's Photoshop. 2000, I don't know why, but that is Photoshopped. And try walking with both of your heels on the ground. Because that's what that's meant to depict. If one of those tanks is full, you can't survive right there. You die right away, and you can't build another tank. That's the problem with their story. Oh, we skipped it. So 2019, 1,000 tanks, and see utilities, that line there, 1,000 tanks. And 2021, 1,000 tanks. 1,000 tanks in 2013, 1,000 tanks in 2021. 1,000 tanks, now I counted them, I showed you at the beginning, it's actually only 750. They claim 1,000 in 2013, 1,200 2014, 900 2017, 1,000 2020, 1,000 2021. Unequivocally, they didn't fill up any tanks since 2013. But if you actually fill up the tank, there's so much radiation you can't get back on site. The tanks are not thick enough to shield you from the numbers we're talking about. And I'd done presentations last week on that and showed the documentation. You know, it's 2.2 sieverts per liter of just beta. They've refused to acknowledge that gamma and alpha and neutrons exist. Call it wastewater. Again, so they bought into the argument that there's filtration system. You can't filter it because once the filter gets over 2 sieverts an hour, which is what the water they're putting through per liter, whatever comes out the other side is going to be more. So within a few minutes, the filters are tens of thousands of sieverts. So now the water coming out the other end is tens of thousands of sieverts per liter. You can't filter this. That's one of the major flaws with radiation in the first place was if there's an accident, there's no way to filter it or deal with it. It's not like a normal spill where you might be able to filter it, right? Or dilute it. Even you can't dilute radiation. That's the problem. You put it in the Pacific, the whole Pacific becomes radioactive. But they bought into the narrative, and I don't know why people show us pictures of paper suits with IAEA written on it. These are homeless. None of the suits got a scratch on them. None of the suits these are paper suits. They're all brand new. None of them are ever dirty. None of them got any rips. None of them got duct tapes on it. Paper suits can't protect you at a nuclear meltdown, for goodness sakes. A recent release study, I've done studies now for almost a decade, and we show an extinction event. Not maybe, not almost, but trips to Alaska for 4 to 5 months at a time doing species counts, they're all gone. Total extinction. I see they got thousands of birds washing up in the United Kingdom yesterday and today. all different species, all of them emaciated. And kooky academics are trying to blame it on rough seas. Which is, if that was true, to be emaciated birds washing up all year long, right? For hundreds of years. They're idiots to even suggest it, but that's desperation. The study is actually the 20th of December, 2021. That's when they released the study. So we went back in time and told the story before the study is released. You see it all the time, too, with public relation firms. When they release a study, they date it further in the future for some reason. 28th of December 2021. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is September 2021, not December. The damnedest thing I ever saw. Again. Where the U.S. conducted the Castle Bravo test, a 15 megaton, not kiloton, but megaton, thermal nuclear. This is 1,000 plus Nagasaki bombs of radiation, 1,000 plus. And so that study is meant to say that it's getting better there. These are lunatics. The nuclear regulatory creeps also mention the possibility that radioactive cesium, that shouldn't be there, because that's destroying and covering them all night. Given a multi-generational legacy of nuclear testing, waste disposal, young activists are voicing their concerns. Young Slow Wara Pacific, a regional collective of young activists, has condemned the Japanese government's plans and lack of consultation. Well, they've already released it. It's covered the entire northern hemisphere by the 31st of March. Oh, my apologies. Hi, everyone. That's a radioactive fallout covered the entire northern hemisphere, but the radiation doesn't just stop because the model stopped on the 31st. According to a research by the Australian National University and the Young Activist Pacific members, Japan's nuclear behavior seems to ignore the region's ongoing nuclear-free independent Pacific movement and the history of colonizers dumping nuclear waste and testing nuclear weapons. Yeah, because Japan back in the 70s wanted to dump 10,000 barrels of fuel into the Mariana Trench, the deepest trench on the planet. That's the Castle Bravo, 1,000 Hiroshima's bombs worth of 1,000 times more than Hiroshima worth of radioactive fallout. That's a nuclear war, see? So we set off 2 nuclear bombs, Hiroshima first and then Nagasaki. Hiroshima was a uranium bomb, Nagasaki was a plutonium bomb. And this is equal to 1,000 of the Hiroshima bombs. And the radioactive fallout is equal to Canada and Iceland firing 500 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons at each other. Which would be hilarious, because Canada and Iceland don't have nuclear weapons outside of the nuclear plant Canada has, 18 of them. We've been captured by the nuclear scum, degenerate, coward industry. Pacific Youth acknowledges that this is an act of transboundary harm and is part of a great legacy where nuclear powers have treated the Pacific as a sacrificial zone, which you can see, this is the Atlantic, for goodness sakes. Not just the Pacific, it's also the Atlantic. It's the entire continents and oceans and fresh water of the planet Earth has been bombarded by that's a nuclear war, see? If you fire 500 nuclear weapons at each other, if one country got 500 Hiroshima bombs today, and another country got 500 Hiroshima 15 kiloton bombs today, and they each start throwing them at each other and detonating, you're going to tell me that that's not a nuclear war? 500 each, 1,000. Just because you set it all off at one time doesn't mean there's less radioactive fallout. That's a nuclear war. Pacific acknowledges this as an act of treason, of betrayal against the entire species. The whole problem with the story was that Japan had done nothing but dump it for 10 years. And we'll do that now for hundreds of thousands of years because there's no incentive for them not to. There's no dissenting opinions allowed. And that they have so much influence and authority and monetary. You know, despite that, if someone like me was to show up and go out and do research expeditions and show an extinction event, if someone like that actually existed and was able to challenge them, just that single entity could destroy the entire integrity of the nuclear industry and every facet of it, not just nuclear power. Let's hope somebody like that exists and is given the opportunity to go out there and bludgeon them. I'd do it, but I'm too old and I don't have the monetary to do stuff like that, unfortunately. Everybody's waiting for somebody else to show up instead of somebody that is good to go. It appears I'm never going to get the chance to challenge them. It's a fatal mistake the planet is making. Nothing I can do about it. I only do the best I can do. I'm in the hole already, a couple of $1,000, and it's not looking good. They took down my site, and it's downhill from here for me, I guess. Most evacuees still feel Fukushima plant poses a danger. That story is from 2021, March the 18th. I didn't cover it, and so I was like, well, I better cover that story. Fukushima plant still poses a danger. This could be 100 years from now, that story still matters. But what matters even more is he's gone back to Fukushima, which is 2.5 kilometers from the nuclear meltdown. But in order to get there, he had to pass 60 million one-ton bags. There's a public forum that came out there, I still haven't covered it, where they say there's 60 million bags, not 30 million like I've been saying. They had to pass 30 million, let's say 30 million bags. 30 million one-ton bags to get there and complain. So he passed 30 million bags to get to his home. In his garden, overgrown with weeds at his home, no longer a home, he shouldn't be there. During his temporary visit, now this here, 11 municipalities, and each municipality has many communities, covered by an evacuation order in the Fukushima nuclear disaster. The gray areas are evacuated. Now, the idea of that was to make you think that radiation only went right there, and that was the limit, right? That's the whole idea of that. Actually, the radiation covers the entire planet. And we got the numbers from the fallout. You're talking 200 million becquerels per liter. Absurd numbers. So he's got to drive past all of that. And look at this disgusting. How despicable is this? Putting it in the ground. My goodness. So now it ends up in the water tables. The 10th survey in January asked evacuees' take on several subjects. We'll get that more detail coming up. They got nice, pretty looking graphs. If you take a train down there and you see that, it's time to run. Remember, like they can fly over this from 1,000 feet up, and they're going to get the numbers on their Geiger counters. So being 1,000 feet away on a train doesn't make it safe. He's in this community, made his way home inside his dilapidated house in February. The floors squeaked and dust. He's 2.5 kilometers in a ghost town away from a nuclear meltdown, and they're calling it dust. And the radioactive debris rose in the air as he walked about. Lunatics say, you believe the system and you go in there and poison yourself with these useless masks on your face, this pathetic idiot mask on your face that can't protect you. It's like wearing a paper suit. It simply can't protect you. It's excruciating to see our house decaying like that. He said, but I need to come here to confirm anew that I have a house and land to protect. You got nothing to protect. It's a radioactive death zone. You're going to go home and you're going to wash your laundry in the same machine as your wife and your grandchildren and everything else and contaminate them. You should be arrested for going there, and the people that convinced you it was safe to go there should be locked in jail for 1 billion years. So he thinks he still has a house in a nuclear wasteland. That's what the media ran the story, see? He's got to drive past that, 30 million of them to get to his house. He's got to go through 3,000 of these Geiger counters to get to his house, in just one community, by the way. You got people actually growing food in paper suits. Like, it doesn't matter if you never go back. If you end up eating that food, you're going to get sick and die right away, for sure. You're going to get sick right away and you'll die later because of it. And they're growing it everywhere. This is actually pictures from the media saying, oh, the poor farmers are being stigmatized, saying people are saying their food is radioactive. Well, of course it is. This is actual pictures from media complaining that people are saying the food is radioactive. These are radioactive 1-ton bags. These are huge numbers we're talking about. They're harvesting it for sale. It's insane that somebody actually would do that, let alone the government would sponsor it. So there is no functional governments on our planet. We've lost control of it to industries. Chief researchers, and they're evil, beyond evil, what they're doing. It defies any evil. And we've never seen anything like this kind of evilness. Chief researcher with the Japan Research Institute for Local Government, a public interest entity, said the primary reason evacuees chose not to return to their hometowns is they believe the nuclear disaster has yet to be contained. Of course it has yet to be contained. You can't contain a nuclear meltdown. Timo's must be in Australia, I guess. I'm going to cover on that. I dug up a lot on Australia today, Timo. Australia is locked down, and instead of buying the French diesel subs, they're buying Americans' nuclear subs. And so the argument they're putting out in Australia right now, well, if we're going to have nuclear subs, what's the difference in having a nuclear power plant? There's no difference. Well, there's a huge difference, a massive difference. The nuclear power plants got fuel pools for starters. They're splitting the atom. That's emitted all day. It's a disgusting, despicable, degenerate industry. It's nothing but cowards. The whole industry is incredible cowards. I've never come across nothing like it. There is no... So that's reactor 4, 190-foot building. I'm just going to play that clip for you. This is one of the many, many medias that claim they're on top of a building that don't even exist.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
Yeah. So is she faking? Why is CNN faking? Why is ABC faking? Why is CBS faking this building like that? Why is BBC Rupert Winfield Hayes faking it, right? This is not good. 95, and what else have they done similar to this, I wonder? 95% of respondents still feel the plant poses a danger. Well, of course it does. As you can see, they're faking that it's okay. It still poses a danger because it's an ongoing nuclear meltdown and they're still growing food there, see? Super important. However, even if their sense of alarm hinders the return, think about someone saying that. Most retain their emotional ties to the hometowns. That must be an expression of their resentment against authorities for the fact that they had to be displaced because of a nuclear disaster. No, it's not resentment against the authorities, it's resentment against the nuclear industry. And it's not resentment against the nuclear industry, it's hate against the nuclear industry and contempt. There's a difference, right? And the nuclear industry is just completely spineless and soulless and heartless and somehow thinks that, oh, it doesn't matter as long as I get my paycheck on Friday, right? That's all that matters to them, they get their paycheck every Friday. They'll kill everything so they can get their paycheck on Friday. I don't understand why the world doesn't just speak out. A system should be created to encourage them to join activities both in their hometowns and a nuclear wasteland, for God's sakes, as well as in their host communities' nuclear wasteland. That way they can avoid feeling isolated and speed up their reconstruction efforts. And they never put their names on these stories. Maybe this one did. Let's see. Yeah. Hiroshi Futasu, staff writer. So that person should be arrested and flogged and then dipped in vinegar and then locked away. Don't bother feeding them. Unless you're going to feed them Fukushima food. Now that man who went to the house still lives apart from his family, lucky for his family. Says you cannot shake off fatigue because the radiation goes in your body, sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and your bones. Your body starts producing endless white blood cells for the rest of your life, attacking that radiation. That displaces your red blood cells that's carrying oxygen and nutrition. So you'll feel fatigue for the rest of your life. And the more you're exposed, the more fatigue, and eventually you call it leukemia. This may sound strange, but my determination to remain a resident of Fukushima is growing firmer, said the useful idiot. Of 11 affected municipalities, 7 were placed in difficult to return zones. Difficult to return. If this happened in Canada, the nuclear industry would be dead already. Canadians would have just killed every one of them off. For sure. They'd be dead right now. There wouldn't be a live pro-nuclear person left in Canada. Someone says, I'm pro-nuclear, a dozen people would bash him to death right on the spot. We're not cowards like Japanese. That prohibits entry as the annual radiation dose is estimated at 50 millisieverts there. 50, like when they say millisieverts in a community, that's the lowest form of life. That's the most cowardly form of life. That's the most dangerous form of life. People who talk about millisieverts and nuclear fallout. The floor squeaked and dust rose in the air as he walked about. Well, he's in an abandoned ghost town. But if you look at Red Bone Marrow study, it's downplayed, right, the significance of it. This was the scumbags from United Nations. Unclear. And you see the second line right there? That number is becquerels per square meter. So nearly 30, and it's only cesium, by the way, but 39,000 becquerels per square meter is cesium in a community. You're supposed to abandon that community. But if you did, then the nuclear industry would be dead already. UN find no adverse health effects from Fukushima. But this is a UN study showing the communities are highly radioactive. They decide to say now that radiation can't hurt you. Look at that. Like, these are absurd numbers. And all the media this year on the anniversary ran with that headline. UN finds, says says radiation from Fukushima will have no negative health effect. And this line here is showing the community is incredibly radioactive. You can't have them numbers and not have no adverse side effects. And so the fact that all the media ran out and screeched that headline for the anniversary of this year, the fact that this corporation known as United Nations is out there and is being put on a pedestal and is now considered the arbiters of any facts. No other facts are... If UN says there's no sun, you can't make a video and say UN is wrong. Google and Facebook and YouTube and everybody will take you down. Twitter will take you down. Right? You can't come on a public platform and say that they're wrong. You're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to say... Next will be McDonald's, right? McDonald's will say, if you eat our French fry, then you'll become a millionaire when you grow up. And you won't be allowed to make a video and say that's crazy. You won't. They'll actually take you. It won't be long now before they'll arrest you if you criticize them for it. Well, he done that to me already. He gave me 6 gag orders, right? That's coming. Soon when you criticize UN or World Health Organization or UNCLEAR or ERPA or any of these subsidiaries of UN, you will be arrested for criticizing them. That day is just this year or next year. That'll start happening everywhere. They got no choice now, see? So these are all the radioactive communities. The first line is the number of people in the community. This line is how many becquerels of just cesium, gamma. Like, this is absurd numbers. You couldn't live in a community here in Canada, United States, or anywhere else. And they're growing food there and shipping it worldwide. Very dangerous precedents being set. You can pretend all this doesn't exist and that nuclear got some redeeming qualities, but you're actually wrong. You can pretend that United Nations is right and that man-made radiation had no adverse side effects, but you're wrong. If that's what gets you to sleep at night, then you really are a monster. You really are some weird demonic demon. You really are the definition of a coward, and you are a murderer. You're plain and simple, you're a murderer. That's what a murderer would do. UN experts say they're not human. Air samples in Tokyo 270 times more contaminated with cesium than global weapons fallout peak. United Nations said, no worries. Map shows Fukushima fallout in the U.S. The doses in the Northeast and Great Lakes are equal to the West Coast. United Nations, no worry. High levels of radioactivity found extensively. No worries. Nuclear radiation, the most carcinogenic thing that exists. Unless you talk to United Nations. United Nations will tell you there is no adverse health effects. Ignore all the experts. We're United Nations. Evacuation plan in municipalities 30 to 50 kilometers from nuke plants are rare. Right, but they do give out iodate tablets up to 50 kilometers away. But they won't put sirens out there for you to evacuate because they got to pay for them, right? The sirens only exist because of activists. Same as the iodate pills. They just exist because of activists, and they've been co-opted now. Although Lydia is about 30 kilometers from Fukushima, number 1 plant, the Discharge plant, some parts of the village are still designated as difficult to return. But they're growing food. Buddy, I showed you at the first story, second story, it was 2.5 kilometers away. And they got him so brainwashed, he thinks he's going back. He actually thinks he's going back. And then they show you these depictions, which they want you to think that the radiation only went there. But the radiation covered the entire northern hemisphere, see? Numerous municipalities, 30 to 50 kilometers from nuclear power plants, including Canada, United States, other countries, European countries, everywhere else, have no evacuation plans for residents in the event of a nuclear accident. That's listen. First off, all nuclear power plants I'll show you how sneaky this industry, how evil this industry actually is. I have the best possible way to articulate that. I got the best way of dealing with that. All nuclear power plants, including, this is the new power plant in the United Kingdom. This is a model of it. The actual 3D version of it, that's a model of the new power plant, surrounded by farms, as far as you can see. And the problem with it is that irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram, and for adults, it's permanent lesions on your organs. But as you start looking at pictures, go and do it yourself. Look at nuclear power plants and get these high up pictures. And they're surrounded by farms. They're always releasing radiation, particularly from the fuel pool. And they're surrounded by farms. Surrounded by farms, surrounded by farms, surrounded by farms and communities. Farms, 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 as far as the eye can see. And so they know that food is sucks up the radiation. This is why they built them in farming communities. And they've been doing this obviously for a very long time. And the radiation lands in the farm. The farms will soak up the radiation. Let me explain that for you very quickly. So we got all kinds of studies on grapevines. Sucks up radiation right away. Strawberries sucking up radiation right away. Wheat plants suck up radiation right away. Tomato plants sucking up radiation right away. Fruit plants sucking up radiation. Using plants as a monitor of radioactive fallout. Potatoes suck up radiation right away and forever. So does all the fruit plants. How trees suck up radiation. How the meadows ecosystem for the cows and grazers suck up radiation. Right? So there's no way they don't know that putting nuclear power plants in a farmland is the definition of evil. It's not an accident. It's actually evil. And most people are so compartmentalized in the nuclear industry, they don't even understand that. So they got fuel pools. The fuel pools, they take the reactor cores out, they put them in these things called fuel pools. Fuel pools have no containment. What that means is vented to the exterior, up big stacks, and they have these jet blowers that blow it up high so it goes far away before it lands, being the farms, right? Because if the farms weren't there, you would have major bioaccumulation around the nuclear power plant. It would be incredible gamma shine everywhere, and the Bromson lung effect would just be brutal everywhere. So the food is shipped out regularly. Right, look in the background, all the farms. So the fuel pools have to be replenished about 120,000 liters each day, each fuel pool. And what that means, though, is that a liter of water has trillions of isotopes because the fuel rods are still splitting the atom. So instead of powering 1 million homes, it's still producing the same amount of atoms, except it's being sucked up by the water and evaporated into the community. This is why they're going into a pool. Just because you stop the chain reaction or the power production, they're still splitting the atom. Where does those atoms go? Well, they land in the farmers' fields all day, every day. And so as the plants get older, Every time you put more fuel in the pool, now you got even more each day splitting the atom. And after decades, you can imagine how much splitting the atoms you actually got going on. New York. New York. Hello? Yep. So this is Frank in New York. So Frank, you're saying all the leaves are deformed in New York now?
Well, I don't know about all the leaves in New York, but all the leaves in my area.
Yeah, and because around New York, they had Indian Point and power plants, nuclear power plants out in New Jersey. And of course, New York, I've talked about it many times, in New York got covered in radioactive fallout, brutal radioactive fallout. Was there anything else you want to throw out there, Frank?
Well, I live in western New York, so near Lake Ontario.
Right, and Lake Ontario got a lot of nuclear power plants around it, yeah.
Right, I don't live downstate.
Yeah, no, I hear you. Okay, Frank, thank you. We're live right now, you know that, obviously, right?
All right, thanks a lot, Dana,
Okay,
for everything you do.
You're welcome, my friend. You have a great night.
To you too.
Okay, yeah, bye-bye. Yeah, I love hearing stuff like that. Unfortunately, I don't like hearing it because it's sad news, right? But you like getting confirmation that there's... Now, New York, of course, I've covered it many times. My other site they took down a few weeks back with 24,000 subscribers. And I can't direct you to those videos because they don't exist anymore. So even future power plants, nuclear power, surrounded by farms. Look at that. That is frightening. Right? Do you think that's an accident? All these nuclear power plants are built in farmland? That's the definition of evil, see? That's actually evil. These are lunatics. Even Chalk River, that's Chalk River, decided one of the first nuclear meltdowns in the northern hemisphere. And look what they got, surrounded by farms. That's here in Canada. Back to the story. The central government expanded the areas where evacuation plans were required from a radius between 8 and 10 kilometers of a nuclear plant to 30. But 30 is not good enough. Right? 30 is not good enough when it covers the entire northern hemisphere of radioactive fallout. Even a small accident will do the same thing. Currently, and because these models are only based on venting, they're not based on the actual inventory that was lost, like the fuel pools and the reactor cores themselves. They're not based on the emissions of that. They're only based on what they call venting. It's a lunatic industry, isn't it? It is such a coward industry. Currently, 121 municipalities, about 90% of the total, have compiled evacuation plans in light of their proximity to a nuclear power plant. They're not nuclear power plants, they're death machines. They're 100% death machines. Each nuclear power plant needs at least 2 external power supplies to work it. So it needs 2 of its own coal, oil, or gas, or combination. And of course, coal, oil, and gas emissions don't pulse energy every second. Nuclear power does. So nuclear power without a meltdown is still going to do this. That's global warming. It's pulsing energy every second. Invisible snowstorm or radiation covering the planet, pulsing energy every second. Stable iodine tablets and radiation measuring equipment are not in every community, and they will just give you faulty ones on top of that. And the situation is somewhat different from municipalities lying more than 30 kilometers from a nuclear plant. Such municipalities are not obligated to compile evacuation plans, So if you're outside the 10 mile, you don't have to have an evacuation plan, despite the fact you got to evacuate if you have an event. The industry is it's a lunatic, see? Like oil, gas, and coal plant breaks down, you don't have to evacuate your community. You don't have to evacuate 10 miles away from your community. You don't have to pass out iodine tablets that are, by the way, useless because you're still going to ingest the radiation. Yeah, it helps. You got to get that iodine tablets 24 hours before the meltdown happens, the emissions happen. And as you notice, they're always emitting absurd numbers. It's evil. It has no right to be on the planet. They really don't have any right to exist. They have no moral right whatsoever, let alone constitutional right. See, Congress Congress don't have the authority, in America, for instance, don't have the authority to make it illegal to be poisoned by radiation. I know that sounds crazy, but it's true. But if they did, nuclear power couldn't exist. Right? So the NRC has the authority, not Congress itself, but the NRC is overseen by Congress. You get how loopy this gets? Because there's no checks and balances. There's no functional whatsoever, any type of checks and balances. There's no incentive not to be evil. There's a huge incentive, though, to be evil. And it's pure greed and pure hatred of humans and species. The Fukushima city government came up with such an evacuation plan because the local officials said that radioactive elements might fall in the city depending on weather conditions, so we needed to plan to provide residents with peace of mind. The city government has purchased stable iodine tablets for 500,000 residents who live within a 50-kilometer radius of a nuclear power plant. And those tablets are stored at 8 locations around the city and will be distributed should an accident. Do you know how long it takes to distribute 580,000 pills? It can't be done, right? In time frame of a nuclear meltdown. The wind blows at 20 or 30 kilometers an hour, you got a few hours. That's it. But you got to take the pills at least 24, 48 hours before it happens for that to assimilate itself into your thyroid gland and be able to displace incoming iodine. But cesium also, all gamma emitters, not just iodine, but all gamma emitters will go into your thyroid. And your body will take that and try to convert it into a hormone. So you have these radioactive, not try to, but will convert the elements that are in your thyroid into a hormone. And if it's radiation, that will get out into your system and mutate organs and glands and many different diseases and illnesses can manifest from that. After the Fukushima nuclear accident, 5 municipalities outside the 30-kilometer radius were designed as areas that had to be evacuated. Those orders are still in place for 2. But an official with one local government had made no mention of possessing a plan for nuclear action and have said such a plan might unduly raise concerns among local residences. Think about that statement. Unduly? Well, no, it's not unduly at all. How is it unduly when radiation can cover the northern hemisphere by the 31st of March? So 20 days, the entire northern hemisphere. So 20 days later, the entire southern hemisphere is also covered. The Akita prefecture government has considered setting up 572 evacuation centers for just the Shinchai residents. 572 evacuation centers. You can't go back after a nuclear meltdown. There's another facet to nuclear. They can trick you into going back, but that don't mean you can go back. There's no benefit for anybody to go back, including the nuclear industry, because ultimately you're going to get sick. Everybody there is going to get sick. There's no maybes about this. Anybody that goes back will end up with some kind of illness or disease, and there's 1,800 of them you get before cancer. Cancer is not the only thing, see? But an official one local government that made no mention of possessing a plan for nuclear accident didn't want to concern the residents. New residents near Fukushima nuclear meltdown, can get 2 million yen, which is 23,000 Canadian. Upper right in Fukushima Prefecture surrounded by vacant land in 2019 after homes and shops damaged by the nuclear disaster by radioactive fallout were demolished. You can't just have random houses get radioactive and the other ones didn't. Radiation doesn't work that way. The government will pay 19,000 USD to families that move to a nuclear wasteland. An unprecedented offer. And you get an additional 4 million yen to those who start a new business in 12 cities, towns, and villages that are evacuated. They want to repopulate. So the industry is insane. That's actually insane. That's actually the craziest story in history. There's no other story out there compares to something like that. Notice how they say triple meltdown, but not triple nuclear meltdown, not triple nuclear power plant meltdown or nuclear reactor meltdown. Only so 20% of the residents have returned there even after evacuation orders were lifted. Those people that lifted the orders should be immediately arrested and held accountable. One requirement is that the families must live in the location for at least 5 years. So they want you to stay there long enough to get sick so they can study you and your children like human guinea pigs. The 40-year cleanup goal at a nuclear power plant in doubt from the start. Well, like Donneray nuclear power plant in the United Kingdom, it's going to take them 300 years to clean up. Fukushima, with multiple nuclear reactors melted down, they think they can do it in 40 years. This is just to get you to leave them alone. Because in 40 years, there'll be nobody around, right, pointing fingers. However, and they'll all be retired. However, it takes about the same amount of time if they're still alive, to decommission a accident-free reactor. Well, like reactors here in North America get easily let it sit for 60 years before they try to start decommissioning. That could take 50 years. So an actual ongoing nuclear meltdown, you can't clean that up in 40 years. It's a super important story, right? And the roadmap for decommission was based on a report by the Captured Atomic Energy Commission, which its job is to promote nuclear and not tell the truth, which formulated the country's nuclear policies in the first place. So you got nobody in charge, and the ones that are pretending they're in charge are lunatics, or the inbreeds of the inbreeds, and are completely callous towards humanity and the 8 million species. It's a complete disregard. The whole industry, this is what we see now over every day, year after year, is this, every single story is the same way, nothing but contempt for humanity, nothing but contempt for all the species. And we see all the industries and medias and universities pandering to this industry. And I have 20 people on my show talking about the facts of it, showing the documentation. Because that's what they do. They curb stomp and censor everybody that wants to have a conversation. Nobody's actually done what I'm doing, where you have an actual educational program. That's never actually been done. You know, where you do 5 shows a week at the same time, and you cover the recent documentation. You show the information that counters their propaganda. That's never actually been done. Just imagine. 40-year cleanup goal at a nuke plant in doubt from the start. Yeah, you can't even clean up an accident-free in a nuclear power plant in 40 years. The commission report dated December the 13th, 2011, is still raging out of control, Dan, by the way, only said it would take more than 30 years to finish the decommission. It contained no reference to 40 years, so they're claiming 30 years. And you can't even decommission a normal reactor in 30 years. And I recall that some colleges said it would take 50 to 60 years just to develop the technology. Right, the technology actually doesn't exist. You can't retrieve the fuel that's spread all around the planet. The reasoning behind the 40-year schedule is that 10 years are needed to prepare for the removal of the debris. But there's no experts. There's only the homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language. Followed by another 10 years each to actually retrieve the melted fuel from the 3 reactors. Again, this is absurd to suggest you can do that when the buildings don't even exist. How are you going to retrieve the reactor fuel from, say, reactor 4? It doesn't exist. That hole you see up there, that's actually the elevator shaft. And then the reactor is right there with my fingers. So that's part 1 of it. Right, the yellow piece is the top, at the very top, at the top of the building is supposed to be, 100 feet above my finger. And behind it is the bottom part of the reactor core. The fuel pools were way 100 feet up there. They don't exist. How are you going to recover the fuel and the reactor core from a building that doesn't exist? How does that actually work? It's the same thing for reactor 3. How are you going to develop technology to recover fuel from a reactor that doesn't exist anymore? It was spread all over the country and the planet. How are you going to recover the fuel rods from a fuel pool that doesn't exist, that was destroyed and emitted? This was, by the way, the mixed oxide fuel facility, MOX fuel. This is 1 billion times worse than a normal brutal nuclear meltdown. How are you supposed to develop technology to remove fuel from 2 buildings that don't even exist? So this is the problem with laws, is you're going to try to develop technology to remove fuel from a building when it doesn't even exist anymore. Like, that's called delusional in normal world. There's a gross understatement that decommission will get done in 40 years. We can't decommission a building that don't exist. 100 years for the full cleanup scenario. Well, you can't get it, like some of the reactor cores, say reactor 2 and reactor 1, gone China syndrome. They're gone straight down into the earth. You can't recover that. First off, there's nobody in the nuclear industry with that kind of skill to develop any kind of technology. They're all coasting on 70-year-old technology as it is, see? There is nobody in the nuclear industry anymore that's innovative or capable, right? They're coasters. They're the entrenched lot. They feel that they're the inbreeds of the inbreeds. They're just here to exterminate all the species. It is a gross understatement that the decommission will get done in 40 years. Yeah. So here's some depiction they put out for some reason. 300 years later, part of the land for the nuclear plant can be reusable in 300 years. But simply not true. Because when the building's detonated, the fuel assemblies actually landed. They brought in remote control bulldozers and plowed it under the ground. Then they put 10 feet of cement, steel, and pavement on top of that. That's incredibly radioactive zones. They've lost control of lots of parts of the site. Would be needed to finish the plan and involve the removal of 7.6 million tons of radioactive waste. 7.6 million tons of radioactive waste. They're trying to convince you there's only 900 tons, right? Prince Philip will be secret for 90 years. So the hideous vampire scumbag, his will now is going to be locked up for 100 years. Don't ask me why that's true. To protect the dignity and standing of the Queen, who never protected the country from Sellafield, right? Waste stored poorly at Fukushima plant. Japanese nuclear regulators, the control opposition, have urged the operator of the disabled Fukushima Daiichi plant to improve the way it manages accumulated waste. Most of the radioactive waste generated through decommissioned plants is being stored at designated outdoor depots. It's all vented, splitting the atom for millions of years. Everything is vented, right? Wreckage and other clutter that cannot be quickly transported there is instead being kept at interim sites for up to 1 year in principle. These interim sites, there was 150,000 of them originally. The Nuclear Regulation Authority said the volume of waste at the interim sites reached 60,000 cubic meters and surged more than eightfold in January of last year. And the waste has been kept longer than 1 year in some sites, and not enough patrols are being conducted because you don't want to die. And the plant's operator, which is not a decommission authority, has no right to have any authority whatsoever, abrogated their rights when they couldn't pay the bill anymore. They went bankrupt right away, and it became nationalized. It says it could not send the waste outdoors depots while work was underway to rearrange containers. Added that the containers had to be inspected following leaks of radioactive lethal substances. We covered that. The company says we'll review temporary storage arrangements and manage waste properly. First off, they've never done a single thing properly, I notice. Total volume of radioactive waste in the plant reached 480,000 cubic meters in March this year, 10 years after triple nuclear reactor meltdown. And it's not an accident. They built it in a earthquake zone and a tsunami zone. They built it in the spot where there's over 5,000 earthquakes a year, and they didn't know that was going to happen. Remember No To Nuke? This is a great story. The globalization of resistance to the nuclear power is our answer to the assault of the international nuclear corporate mafia. International nuclear corporate mafia. And it's not even a mafia, it's a death cult. It's a secret society death cult. If it was a mafia, that would be one thing. You can use the RICO Act against them, but this is a death cult. The Batam nuclear power plant in the Philippines, 100 kilometers west of Manila. It was the Americans who prompted that to happen. 35 years after being mothballed, the Batam nuclear power plant continues to hound a discredited regime for its single largest fraudulent transaction. Yet post-Estes administrators, from President Ramos to Rodrigo Duterte, actually tried but failed to revive a white elephant or reintroduce nuclear power plant in the country, despite the plants being deemed unsafe and dangerous. There actually was over 4,000 faults discovered with this plant, which is amazing. They tried to keep reviving this, right? Either they have forgotten or just simply took for granted how people power battled a threat that could trigger a possible nuclear disaster in the country. So the whole country went to war against this nuclear power plant. This is why you've seen 9,000 people in India were arrested and charged with sedition after Fukushima Nuclear Meltdown when they protested a new reactor being built, right? 9,000 people were arrested and charged with sedition. They're still under charges right today. No less than the Department of Energy. Imagine being charged with sedition for protesting. Try wrapping your mind around it. That's the nuclear industry. It's a lunatic. And the people that have got the positions of authority are not humans. They got none of the attributes of a human. They're lunatics and should be in a room with a drip at best, at least. still think that the BNPP failed only because there was a communication problem or that it lacked a public relation campaign. So the Department of Energy in the Philippines and the Department of Science and Technology think that it's not running because of a lack of public relation campaign. So this is how they do it, public relation campaign, where they own all the media and the media comes out and regurgitates the propaganda. According to social scientist Dr. Rowland, who chaired the Nuclear-Free Philippine Coalition, the globalization of resistance to nuclear power is our answer to the assault of the international nuclear corporate death cult and secret society. Perhaps if only to set the record straight, the NFPC is coming out in October with documentation of the anti-BNPP campaign in the book Nuclear Free Nation, The Power of the People versus the Nuclear Power in the Philippines. Yeah, the people in the Philippines, man, they went to war. All grassroots. Environmentalists and anti-nuclear power advocates have consistently fought tooth and nail against the revival of the nuclear plant and nuclear power itself. Dr. George Emanuel, then a U.S.-based chemist and research engineer with the General Electric Corporate Research Center, wrote in 1971, the U.S. State Department instructed its embassy in the Philippines, in Manila, to pressure the Philippine government to pursue plans for 2 nuclear reactors. So you shouldn't have an American embassy in your country because they do stuff like that. And that's not the job of the U.S. Embassy, by the way. And the U.S. State Department instructed its embassy in Manila to pressure. So that's not what the embassies are supposed to do. They're supposed to be a goodwill to those countries. I use embassies before in different countries for information. And so they have packages on all kinds of subjects for different countries. And you contact the embassy about a subject, they'll send you a package with all the names, a list of all the people, contacts, and business cards. Say you wanted to sell hats in the Philippines. They'll send you a big package right away, too, with all the contacts of people that buy hats in the Philippines from Canada. You know what I'm saying? Or you wanted to sell beans to the Philippines. When you contact the Canadian, here, if you're Canadian, you contact the Canadian embassy in the Philippines and say, I want to sell beans to the Filipinos. And they'll send you a big package of the whole market and the auction blocks and everything. That's a great symbol, eh? I like that one. As early as 1957, when the Philippines Atomic Energy Agency was formed, the Philippines had already trusted the International Atomic Energy Agency with reviewing the prospects. So the IAEA is they're a global, they're the globalists. They're the New World Order, which is who George Bush called. They were created in 1957, right? And in 1959, they partnered up with United Nations. But nobody knows who created the IAEA. There is no official organization that takes credit for creating them. They were an anonymous organization in 1957. But they were under the umbrella of UN, which is, George Bush calls the New World Order. They're a corporate personhood, but they don't have sovereignty over your countries. Emmanuel eventually joined the International Solidarity Campaign against BNPP, said he believed the President Marcos' decisions to install the first nuclear power plant. And Marcos' wife got arrested with like 50,000 pairs of shoes. They were robbing the country. And the country was greatly influenced by the U.S. government along with the U.S. consulting firm Burns and Rowe. Burns and Rowe. People forget about them, right? And various IAEA reports that consistently overestimated the growth of nuclear power and underestimated its cost. Like France's reactors right now, the ones they're building right now in different countries, were supposed to be around $3.4 billion each. They're actually 10 times that, over 30 billion. Try wrapping your mind around it. That's the norm, though. They do that all the time. Oh, $3-4 billion. And then they'll say it'll be ready in 10 years. It's never ready until 20 years later, 30 years later. Watts Bar took, was it 39 years or something? The second phase of the campaign began in 1985 when the Marcos government tried to open and operate the nuclear power plant, triggered an NFPC-led people's strike that effectively paralyzed transportation and operations in the entire province in the Batam in the Philippines. It's an amazing story. The nuclear-free Bataan movement considers it a cement manifestation of people power, which happened even before the 1986 EDSA uprising. People realized they have to take action against the nuclear plant because they became aware of the consequences that could happen to them. Right? That's a prime example of what we're not doing. And PAEC issued the license to the nuclear NPC to operate the BNPP power plant at an inflated cost of $2.3 billion, 4 times the initial bid of $600 million. Over and over and over, you see them. And in 1986, they found 4,000 technical defects with that power plant. And it also, in 1986, led to the declaration of a nuclear-free Philippines in the 1987 Constitution, which finally incorporated explicit peace and anti-nuclear weapons provisions. So the Philippines, like Australia, have it built into their constitution that nuclear power is prohibited on their soil. 2 Japan Prime Minister hopeful would introduce nuke fusion small modular reactors. Well, first off, nuke fusion doesn't exist and probably won't. The joke with nuclear fusion is it's 50 years away. In 50 years, we can do it. That's what they said 50 years ago, right? And small modular reactors, which don't exist, and economies of scale is the reason that you have the big nuclear power plants in the first place. That was the only way to make a profit. But the small modular reactors, the trick they're playing on everybody there is that, and everything with nuclear industry, you got to treat it as suspect, no matter what they say. But small modular reactors that they're talking about in Canada and other countries only burn MOX fuel. And MOX fuel is illegal in the United States and Canada. They got to change the law. But what kind of evil would consider using MOX fuel? France burns MOX fuel. Of course, France created a civil strike in Niger in order to get their hands on very high-grade uranium for over 60 years. So they created a civil war, in Niger that's ongoing for over 60 years. They destroyed that country and surrounding countries. There was endless destruction of all the infrastructure in the country. And France has been there for 60 years with an army too, so they can have cheap uranium for their power plants in France. And there's all the bootlickers out there will call France carbon-free France. France got it right. Look at all the power plants they got. Well, that's simply not the truth, though, right? Not only that, France uses 70% of its fresh water for nuclear power plants. They can't even farm there because all the fresh water has to go to the nuclear power plants. So 2 Japan prime ministers will introduce hopefuls coming up are talking about nuclear fusion and small modular reactors. It shows you how much influence you got to have. In Japan, to get elected, you got to be pro-nuclear, is what you're seeing. But also, you got to realize there is no nuclear fusion, and there ain't going to be in our lifetime. And because of Fukushima, we're probably the last generation to live out our lifespans. And small modular reactors don't exist. So how can you have promised to introduce something that don't exist? Well, you're only saying that because that makes the nuclear industry happy. Right? That's the only reason that you would say, that you would invoke something like that. Remember, at the nuke plant, I counted, you can count the tanks yourself. There's tons of recent pictures, and you're only going to find 750, not 1,000. And not only that, the tanks are empty, because if you fill up the tank, you can't build another tank there. So they want you to think about dumping into the ocean, not what they have already done to the ocean, see? Bear with me. So they want you to think about dumping into the ocean, not the ocean is already a dump for nuclear fallout. That's the game they're playing. And it's a game to them, but it's not a game to us and the millions of species on this planet. You got to act now. We're running out of time. We ran out of time. I've done the research expeditions. This is an extinction event. You can go to my site and check it out at thenuclearproctologist.org. You'll find links below. Click on the donate button to my site at the bottom of the description. That'll take you to the first page. And there's a donate button there, but it'll take you to the first page, my site. Scroll down, you'll see the extinction event. And all that documentation was eradicated when I took down my site a few weeks back. 31st of March, you got the entire northern hemisphere pulsing energy every second for the rest of our lives. That's global warming, what you're looking at there. It's an invisible snowstorm pulsing energy for millions of years. I mean, if that's not global warming, what is? And this has been going on for 75 years, since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so there was no show on Thursday. I worked myself under the table, burnt out. And same thing Friday, and I took Saturday off and today off, even though I didn't want to. I had no choice. I was so burnt out. I kept working, putting these stories together. But physical work, because... And then it's supposed to get up to 90 millimeters of rain tonight and strong winds up to 100 kilometers, 120 gusts tomorrow. I won't be working those days, obviously, on what I need to get done. And so we haven't raised any money in quite a while. And we're spending money that we don't got, so I'm way in the hole. I got no choice. You got to keep the operation moving forward and chump change if I got to, right? We got to keep the operation moving forward. We can't let the operation fail. We got to try to build up supporters and viewers and raise money to keep this operation moving forward. The industry doesn't have to do anything. They just throw billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars at it. I can't even waste a nickel. And since you took down my new site, it's hard to raise very much money to cover the... Well, we're way in the hole now. We're 1,500 in the hole. And that ain't going to slow down. So I'll be in a new place on the weekend. And that'll save some money. It's cheaper. Oh my. I'm so burnt out from trying to do the right thing all the time. Angelica, yeah, thank you. Thinker, Colette S. Did I get all the plywood up? No. I burnt out on Friday. I can't figure out how to mount the doors on the building. I'll figure it out on Tuesday or Wednesday. I done the best I could, but I'm just one person, right? But I got the back part done, Colette, on Friday. All the back of it's done, so it's just the front. I got the wood already. I got the equipment. Dana Nasana. Hi, Dana. Thinker, Timo. Maverick. Scott Brady. Let me see. Anna C. Sandra. Hi, everyone. Just going through the comment section quickly to say goodnight to those, and goodnight to everybody else that's not there or is watching this later. Bless all of you. John St. Ives, I already have, but they took down my site. Darren James, Andrew Johnson, Andrew B. I only serve one king. Hi, everyone. Just scroll up quickly. We'll call her tonight. Jeffrey Brown, Scott Brady. Anybody I miss? I notice I always seem to miss one or two people. Steve White, Ted Richards, Meta World Peace. Yeah, love you tons too, Colette. Hugs, honey. Amy Howard, thank you. Nerad, Yerloff. Edwards, Ella. See, I missed Ella on the way up through that time. I seen her commenter earlier. That's what I mean, right? I'm not trying to miss people, but it happens. H. Thomas Ackerman. Hi, Thomas. Thomas has been out there beating the shit out of the Fukushima scumbags for years and years and years, folks. He's a master painter on top of that. Extremely talented individual, and has fought tooth and nail against Fukushima for years and years and years. If you're not familiar with Thomas, H. Thomas Ackerman, trust me, you're not going to find any more honest than him. I guarantee it. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody tomorrow night, and we're going to cover Reactor 2 tomorrow night. We're going to put that baby to rest. We're not going to, don't give them any wiggle room. When it comes to the nuclear industry, you got to come out and stomp, and you got to stomp on them hard. You got to curb stomp them. So, if you think about it, give us a thumbs up. I got 37 thumbs up. What's going on there? How the hell did I get that many thumbs up? And like, it's a weird one. I got 26 people in the show. God bless all of you. Hugs for everybody. See everybody tomorrow night. Come back and drag this scumbag industry into the dirt again for Unit 2. Have a great night, folks. God bless.